As a slightly more personal thing, I'm not going to mention any names here. I happen to know a doctor somewhere who is a Muslim living in the West. He's a very bright man, a very honourable man. He's got a young family. He's an intensely devout Muslim, but in a very balanced way. He's a very good role model to his children, his young children. He's got a couple of young children, and his wife. Now, I mention it because he and I privately talk about precisely these matters, and the way he can't speak out publicly about his concerns to do with precisely these issues, and that he is required, as you say, by the medical association and by society to speak in certain ways which he thinks are harmful actually to the health and well-being of people. But the latest ideology says he must do it. He could lose his job. I mean, it really is an existential issue for him. It's not, a nice thing here. It is he has to toe the line, or he could be called out and lose his job. And this affects all doctors, not just him, of course. But he's a particularly conscientious Muslim, and so we talk about this privately. And he expresses his anxieties, frustrations, and anger. Actually, the way he has to speak to his patients sometimes. You come to him. Well, I won't go into the details, but there's some things he must say to them which he knows aren't right, but he is obliged to because of the way the law is. And what are Muslims like that to do? Because I mean, on the one hand, traditionally, you do Hijrah. You leave the West, leave Britain. Right. Well, okay. Well, he's born in Britain, actually. He's a UK guy. He has no connections with any particular other. I mean, it's a very dangerous situation he finds himself, and all I can think of is to say is encourage him to bring up his children in good values, introduce traditional Muslim values, but then they go to schools and then they're being brainwashed in the predictable ideologies from a very young age. So he can't protect them completely. He is at the mercy of benign educational and medical authorities who are forming his children in ways which he knows are harmful to some extent. It's a really nasty situation for people to be in, I think. And in a free society, a society that's supposed to be mature and civilized, we shouldn't be treating our people like this and our doctors forcing them into these acutely difficult situations, and their families as well. Anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest, but this is not just a theoretical, eschatological question. This is affecting real people here and now, both in Britain and doubtless in the United States as well, and in France, wherever they are people of goodwill and good moral character, who Muslims or traditional Christians perhaps, or people of other faiths, not just Muslims, of course.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree with that. And there multiple times people have contacted me privately, and they've told me, I love your posts that go on social media, but I don't like, nor do I share them because I'm afraid that I might get fired or I might not get a promotion. Just things like that. I mean, so I totally understand, the concerns. I mean, I've spoken to Muslim psychologists who've actually, risked their jobs, to not have to reaffirm people as, whatever sort of gender that they supposedly belong to, or to affirm a homosexual relationship. Those type of things were encouraged and tell them that these are good things. It's a major challenge, and I'm not sure if the U.S. is actually better than the UK. It sounds like sometimes when I hear people speak about the UK, it sounds like the UK may be in a much more difficult situation than we are in the US. Because at least my understanding, and I could be wrong, of course you can correct me, that you can't just simply opt out of the public schooling. You can't say, I'm not going to take my children to public school. Is that true, or is this something?
I don't know. I thought that was. I think that may be an option, but I just way out.
Okay, no, maybe.
What I had heard though, Dr. Ali, was that the government were closing the loop in as much as traditional-minded people were availing themselves of this option, and then the government saying, no, we want you to teach the right things, actually, even if you do homeschool them. And so even that avenue has been compromised in some way. But I would need to double check that.
Right. Well, at least at home, even if you're teaching your children at home certain things that the government requires for you to teach them, at least you can, they're not there. They're not being indoctrinated in the same way that they would be indoctrinated in the actual public school system, right? Right. So you can tell them, I say, what you're going to learn is you just need to pass. You need to do the work so you can pass your grade. But we don't believe this, and this is why. So like where if you send them to the school, and with all these other children as well who are being indoctrinated into these ideas, and so there's an extreme amount of pressure upon them to do that. So definitely homeschooling is an important option. Hijrah, or immigration is also an important option. I've told people recently about the U.S. The thing that's good about the U.S. is that each state in the United States is like its own country, right? So say if I feel that California is unbearable, then I can move to Texas, move to a Republican state, for instance, where I'll have more freedom, right, in a Republican state. And unfortunately, Muslim politicians in the U.S. And many of the Muslim activists, at least the more popular Muslim activists, are they're reinforcing or normalizing a lot of these ideas.
This is what I heard. I mean, from this side of the pond, I'm in France, but it's the same kind of dynamic. I get the impression that many of the leaders of the Islamic activists, without mentioning names, I don't mean at Zaytuna, of course, at all, but in other places, are affirming the latest agendas, LGBT agendas and gay marriage and all of that, in very strident ways, whilst wearing a hijab and whilst sticking up for Palestinians at the same time. Cognitively, it's quite confusing. You think, this looks like a Muslim, they're pro-Palestinian, and yet she is advocating for this, and this, which is clearly against Islam. And wow, I mean, how is it's a very naive question, but I don't know how is this possible? Why are these people doing this? Why aren't they just speaking the truth? Why are they? Is it a desire to be accepted by the mainstream United States and be received into the institutions of power and office? Is that the temptation, or?
I think that's part of it. I definitely believe that the main driving force behind it is power, is the pursuit of power. Right. Yeah. And there's an ideology, a popular ideology among the activists and political class in the U.S., which is basically fundamentally to say that the ends justify the means, right? And so. But of course, it's difficult to understand what the ends are, right? But it does at times it seems that the only end that they have in mind is the freedom of Palestine, right? Liberate Palestine, and if anyone who will support us in that particular goal, then we will remain silent about their problems, right? Because they support us, and so we'll support them, and even be advocates for them, right? And that itself is extremely problematic. And what it does is it demoralizes young Muslims with respect to Islam. It doesn't give much hope for a future for Islam among many of our children. However, I'm not convinced myself personally that these particular ideas are predominant among the masses of Muslims, at least those who go to the mosque. Right. Yeah. My experience has been something different. I think that many Muslims are just simply afraid to speak up, like we talked about before, afraid to say something. They are confused about how to actually address these issues. Yeah. And so the argument that has been given to them is that, okay, well, we live in a secular country, and so we should be in favor of secular society. So any right that any person is given in a secular society, we should support it. And so that makes sense to a lot of Muslims, but they're not understanding that how it compromises their own convictions, and it
Because
causes a lot of confusion.
I will mention his name because he's said this publicly. I think Professor Jonathan Brown of Georgetown University has come up as perhaps something that sounds a bit similar to that we should support gay rights and so on because, it's a kind of quid pro quo. We they all support us and we live in a secular society. It's an interesting logic and a controversial one.
Right, yeah, and Dr. Brown, he's a friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, he's a friend of mine, and I've disagreed with him on that publicly. And others have disagreed with him on that publicly, and I think that it was personally very short-sighted, and we're seeing the results of that particular opinion like that. But his opinion, of course, is less extreme than some of the other people. Right?
No, he's not saying
he's responsible for this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's not saying that gay marriage is okay or anything like that.
Right, so exactly. He's very clear about that.
He's very, very clear about that. It's more a strategic option rather than a moral one. But nevertheless, it does raise eyebrows. So I was going to ask you something. I forgot what it was now. But so in terms of Hijrah, so we kind of raised that, but then, and you sort of said, well, internally in the United States, it's a federation of states, so almost like not independent, but separate countries. So you can move. But if you're in Europe and, I don't know, the options are kind of less obvious, perhaps. If you're a French Muslim, I mean, you're not where you're going to go. It's not,
right. Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty much the same up and down the country, really. And ditto, probably most places. I mean, is there a naive question about, is there any Muslim country, properly so called, that is a good place to do Hijrah to? Or is it?
Well, I think that every place has its problems. Like, for instance, I studied in Morocco, and I like Morocco a lot. Right. The only problems that I have with Morocco are that their health system to me doesn't seem to be supportive of individuals who lack the means to actually take care of themselves properly. Right.
I've heard exactly that point. So I was speaking to someone the other day who knows that country, and that was the one point he mentioned. It's funny you should say exactly the same thing.
Right. Yeah, and and my wife's she's from Morocco, and so she tells me once these things were revealed to me, she says, "Well, are you sure you still want to move to Morocco?" Because I was thinking about perhaps that.
I see. Yeah. So it's basically you're saying you've got to weigh up inevitably the pros and cons, both in the West and living in other countries where you may have this much more healthy halal environment, but nevertheless there are other problems. I mean, health matters. Having a good doctor, access to a good hospital matters. It's not a
I totally. And then the other part too, I think that when things fall apart, I think that Western countries probably will be worse off morally, once things fall apart. But Western countries also are in the position, they have the technology and the industry to recover faster, right, than a lot of other places too, right? So I don't know. I mean, at times I was like, well, maybe don't make Hijrah. Other times it's like, well, yeah, make Hijrah, maybe short term, or it's really difficult to really know what to do. But right now, my thinking about the issue has been, well, the U.S. is very large, a very large place, and every state has its own culture, and the fact that we do have, at least two parties, right? The dominant parties, political parties, and there are some clear distinctions that exist, at least today, with respect to the areas that will accommodate our values, right? I think among the Republicans, in particular in the U.S., that make those particular states more attractive than many of the Democrat states. If not all of them.
These Republican places quite Islamophobic. So you've got the values, but then they're going to reject the Muslim, and yet the Democrats will embrace the Muslim, the values, and you kind of
No, but that's the issue is that that Republican plays. Many people are Islamophobic, but not everyone is Islamophobic. And I think that what happens is that the media projections of that, and the pundits, the Republican pundits, will make that seem to be the case. Because I've dealt with many conservative Christians, right, and I never feel that they're Islamophobic at all. I think that what happens often is in the mainstream media, a criticism of like Ilhan Omar, somebody legitimate criticism of her, and then all of a sudden it's labeled to be Islamophobic. And I said, well, that's not really Islamophobic. That's a legitimate criticism of her, right? So it's utilized. Islamophobia is utilized for political gain often, and I think that because we have the type of Muslim politicians and activists in the country, that fundamentally this actually doesn't give a lot of these conservatives, or in particular evangelicals, good reason to give up their Islamophobia, right? In my viewpoint, because they were talking about after 9/11 how Muslims were a fifth column, right, in the West, trying to destroy America, trying to destroy the West. And then now we have these Muslim politicians who are, again, trying to normalize, of course, LGBTQ. They're trying to normalize abortion. They're in support of the violent BLM riots, and justifying violence and criminality by minority populations. And so why would I not think that this is what a Muslim politician or a Muslim government would do, right, to our society, right? Not to say that our society is perfect, was perfect prior to that, or continues to be perfect, but it's just, I think, that's just something, an idea that I think that most people don't really reflect upon, right? I definitely think that, that they're Islamophobic. If anything, put it like this, I like to say that the Republicans or the conservatives are really not. They're more, we call Muslim phobic, because I don't think that they know enough about Islam for them to actually be opposed to it. Because if those who actually come to know more about Islam come to appreciate it, right, and realize there's a lot of similarity between the religion and their own beliefs and practices, right? Yeah. But the left are not Islamophobic, where they're imanophobic, meaning, and iman is the word for faith. So they don't like people who are committed to their faith.
Right? I like that. You say imamophobic. Is that what you? Is this a term you coined, or can we all use it?
I can't remember if I heard of someone or I coined it. I can't recall.
I'm sure you coined it. I think it's an excellent expression. If you don't mind, I'm going to use it again myself. So because it's a nice distinction, because the left is typically very secular, very atheist, very humanistic, and very, inverted commas, progressive, and in many ways hostile to fundamental values held by traditional Christians and Jews and Muslims and others. Yeah, God, it's quite depressing. But I like what you just said about America, because I completely fallen for the media stereotype here. You talked about the enormity of the United States, and there are different cultures and different kind of states within that. And so there is room for maneuver, perhaps, for a conscientious Muslim family who want to live in a better environment. You can do that. And I think maybe in a micro way that might just be possible in Europe. I don't know enough about the issue really to talk about that, but that's kind of a little bit hopeful. It's not just a default thing to Hijrah. There is some maneuverability within the West, at least in the US.